Nancy, that's my seat. Was your seat. I'm the mother of his son. Things are different now. Grace, the baby needs hot water. Go and boil some now. Grace, I said leave the room. I'll take care of my husband. Your husband? Let me remind you whose name is on the marriage certificate.
The night my husband's mistress went into labor in my matrimonial home, I was the one boiling the water. I was the one holding the lantern. I was the one who had to smile when our son, the son my body refused to give him, let out his first cry. They called me strong. They called me dignified. They called me the perfect wife. But let me tell you what they never called me: mother. My name is Grace. And before I tell you how I survived what would have destroyed most women, I need you to do something for me. Drop a comment right now telling me where you're watching from: Lagos, London, New York, Atlanta. I want to know if this story is reaching women all over the world who understand this pain. And hit that subscribe button, because what happens next, you won't believe it until you see it. Now, let me take you back to the beginning, before everything fell apart.
I love
You
you
know what's
more than
funny?
my own life.
The same day my
I love you
husband told
too.
me he loved me more than his own life was exactly 3 months before he brought another woman into our house. But I'm getting ahead of myself. In the beginning, before grief carved out a permanent residence in my chest, before silence became the third person in my marriage, my husband Francis was simply a calm man who came home every evening. He would arrive with bags of beverages tucked under his arm, sometimes gift packs wrapped in brown paper, sometimes with nothing but his gentle smile. But he always came home early. That was the Francis I knew, the Francis I married. We lived in a self contained apartment in the bustling heart of Lagos, where car horns sang through the night and generator fumes mixed with the scent of frying akara every morning. Our compound was modest, but our neighbors respected us. Francis was not a loud man, but when he spoke at community meetings, people leaned forward, afraid to miss the wisdom that came out so quietly. Men like Francis didn't need to announce themselves. Their presence arrived long before they did. I married him when I was still young enough to believe that happiness was a permanent condition, not a visiting guest. Those were the days when joy came easily to me, when my laughter needed no permission, when I didn't yet understand how quickly a woman's smile could become a mask she wore for survival. I believed then that love was enough, that sharing meals, sharing a bed, sharing dreams, and whispering plans in the dark would be sufficient to build a life. I didn't know then that one missing piece could unravel everything. And my mother had studied Francis carefully before giving her blessing. She didn't just look at his face, she measured his posture, tested his patience, watched how he responded when I spoke. "This man will not beat you," she finally said, her eyes sharp with the wisdom of women who had survived. My aunt nodded slowly, her wrapper shifting as she adjusted her weight. "This man will not abandon you." If only they knew how many ways a man could live without ever walking out the door. They spoke of him often after that. My mother, my aunts, the women who gathered to pound yam in our compound. Francis became their standard, their proof that good men still existed. The day I got married, as I prepared to leave my father's compound to follow this man into an unknown future, my mother pulled me close. She pressed her forehead against mine, her breath warm with the scent of bitter cola. "Marriage," she whispered, "is not a place you go to rest. It is a farm. If you do not work, hunger will shame you." I nodded, not fully understanding. I was young enough to believe that love alone could make things grow, but some seeds, no matter how much you water them, simply refuse to sprout. By our fifth wedding anniversary, I had become an expert at reading silence. I could tell the difference between comfortable silence and the kind that was slowly suffocating our marriage. And that particular evening, when Francis came home and wouldn't look me in the eye, I knew something had shifted forever. The first years of our marriage passed like a gentle river, predictable, comforting, steady. We walked together before dawn, when Lagos was still stretching and yawning. I would cook while he prepared for work, and we would eat from the same plate, sitting close enough that our knees touched. The intimacy wasn't in grand gestures, it was in these small, ordinary moments. At night, after we had both bathed and eaten, we would lie side by side in our small room, talking about everything and nothing. One day, Francis would say, staring at the ceiling as if he could see the future painted there, I will build a bigger house. One day, I would add, smiling into the darkness, our children will run between those rooms. He always smiled when I spoke of children. That smile was my confirmation, my assurance that we were walking the same path toward the same destination. Francis was a man of simple pleasures. He liked his soup thick with ogbono and swimming with stockfish. And he liked his clothes folded with military precision, his shoes placed side by side like obedient soldiers. When he returned from work, he would sit and listen to me talk, really listen, nodding at the right moments, laughing when I tried to mimic our neighbors' quarrels. During his workdays, I waited for his return with the anticipation of a young bride, even years into our marriage. When he came home early, I teased him about being tired of his colleagues. When he came home late, I worried silently but never accused. Trust came easily to us then. But trust, I would learn, is like a clay pot. It takes years to mold and only seconds to shatter. In the first year of marriage, I expected a child. When it didn't come, we didn't panic. There was always next year. When the second year passed, we told ourselves these things take time. When the third year slipped away, the people who used to predict our children's names stopped predicting and started observing. By the fifth year, the silence around my childlessness had grown loud enough to deafen. It didn't announce itself with trumpets or accusations. It was more subtle than that. Women lowered their voices when I approached the market. Conversations paused mid sentence like interrupted prayers. Some women looked at my stomach before they looked at my face, as if my womb were a question they were tired of asking aloud. One afternoon at Tejo Market, a woman I barely knew, someone's cousin's friend, glanced at me and said with false sweetness, Ah, Sister Grace, you are still as slim as a girl. Oh, I smiled. She nodded slowly, her mouth tightening into something that wasn't quite a smile. I carried those words home like a basket filled with stones. At night, alone, even when Francis lay beside me, I replayed every month, every missed sign, every false hope. I counted days on my fingers until my hands became calendars of disappointment. I prayed. I fasted. I bargained with God like a desperate merchant. I blamed myself quietly, thoroughly, relentlessly. Francis never blamed me. He never raised his voice or threw accusations. That was both his greatest kindness and his quietest cruelty, because blame can be fought. Accusations can be answered. Silence has no opponent. Sometimes at night I felt his body turn away from mine, not dramatically, just slightly, not enough to mention, just enough to feel, just enough to break something small inside me every single night. I told myself it was fatigue. I told myself men carried worries women couldn't see. I told myself that patience was also a form of love. I told myself many things in those days. Most of them were lies. I never forget the moment I realized my marriage was over. Not because he said anything, but because of what I heard him not say when his sister told him to replace me. The first real crack in our marriage came in the form of a conversation I was never supposed to hear. I was returning from the market earlier than usual. The fish seller had run out early, and I had given up. The sun was still high enough to burn, and sweat traced paths down my spine as I walked. As I approached our compound, I heard voices drifting through the afternoon heat. One voice was Francis's, measured, careful, tired. The other belonged to his elder sister, Sister Patience. She had always spoken to him with the authority of someone whose birth order granted permanent jurisdiction over his choices. "You are still young," she was saying, her voice sharp as a new blade. "A man without a child is like a tree without roots. When the wind comes, what will hold you down?" "I know," Francis replied. His voice was calm, but I heard the weight pressing down on each word. "Then act," she commanded. I stood just outside our gate, my market bag slipping down my sweating hand, my heart hammering against my ribs. "What do you want me to do?" Francis asked. There was resignation in his voice, not resistance. Resignation. That's when I knew I had already lost him. Sister Patience lowered her voice, but not enough. "Take another woman." The air left my chest. "There are good girls," she continued, her words casual, as if she were recommending a new brand of detergent. "Quiet girls, fertile girls, girls who know their place." I didn't wait to hear Francis's answer, because deep down, I already knew what it would be. I turned and walked away, my legs shaking, my pride bleeding quietly inside me, where no one could see. I walked until I reached the main road. Then I stood there, letting Lagos swallow me in its noise until I could breathe again. That night, Francis said nothing about the conversation. Neither did I. Silence settled between us like an unwanted guest who had arrived uninvited and refused to leave. And that's when I learned the first lesson that would save my life later. Sometimes the battles you don't fight are the ones that keep you alive. They say you can get used to anything if you do it long enough. I never believed that until I found myself getting used to sleeping alone in a bed I shared with my husband. After that day, I learned to swallow many things. I swallowed my fear when his touch became rare, careful, almost apologetic. I swallowed my shame when neighbors spoke loudly about sons and lineage within my hearing, their words carefully aimed like poisoned arrows. I swallowed my questions when he started coming home later, his explanations thinner than the soup I could no longer bring myself to cook with love. I told myself, he's still my husband. In our culture, that sentence could hold a woman upright for years, decades even. Some nights I pressed my palm against my flat stomach and whispered promises to a future that refused to arrive. Other nights, I turned my face to the wall and slept like a stone, heavy, cold, unmoving, but even stones crack eventually. The day my husband brought his mistress home, he introduced her as his distant relative who needed help. I smiled and welcomed her, and that smile, that one smile, cost me everything. Nancy arrived during the Harmattan season, when dust settled on everything like a curse. She was introduced as a distant relative who needed temporary shelter. Her voice was soft, her eyes always moving, as if she were afraid to stay too long in one place. She was younger than me, maybe 22, maybe 23. Her skin shone like fresh palm oil. Her laughter came easily, lightly, like she hadn't yet learned what it cost to be a woman in this world. I welcomed her. That is what wives did. That is what good wives did. I showed her to the spare room, the one we had kept empty for the children who never came. I taught her how Francis liked his food, not too salty, plenty of pepper. I showed her how he preferred silence after supper, how he liked his space to think. She listened carefully, too carefully. She helped with chores. She laughed at Francis's jokes, jokes he had stopped telling me months ago. She listened when he spoke, leaning forward slightly, the way I used to when we were newly married. I noticed how he began correcting her gently, the way he once corrected me, how his voice softened when he called her name, how he started coming home earlier again. I told myself it was nothing, but a woman always knows. We just choose when to admit it. One night, sleep refused me. I lay awake, listening to the sounds of the compound, the neighbor's generator humming, a dog barking in the distance, the quiet breathing beside me, until it wasn't beside me anymore. Francis rose quietly, too quietly, the way people move when they don't want to be caught. I waited. Minutes passed, then more. Finally, I stood, my heart beating like a talking drum, and I stepped outside our room. The compound was dark, except for moonlight filtering through the zinc roof. In the kitchen doorway, I saw two shadows pressed together, one tall, one small, Francis and Nancy. I didn't move closer. I didn't call out. I didn't scream or cry or collapse like women do in the movies. I just stood there, frozen, watching my marriage die in real time. Then I went back inside and lay down. When Francis returned, I pretended to sleep. That was the night my husband stopped being only mine. And the worst part? I let it happen. You want to know what breaks a woman? It's not betrayal. It's not even being replaced. It's watching another woman's belly swell with the future you prayed for every single night. After that, everything changed and everything stayed the same. The compound continued its daily rhythm. Neighbors still greeted me with respect. Francis still came home every evening, but Nancy's belly began to swell. Slowly at first, like a secret she was trying to keep. Then, unmistakably, undeniably, like an announcement written on her body for everyone to read. I watched it happen, month by month, week by week. It was torture, but I enjoyed it. I became the wife who smiled, the wife who made room, the wife who pretended not to notice when Francis's hand unconsciously moved to touch Nancy's growing stomach as they talked. Francis spoke to me one evening, his words measured, rehearsed, like he had practiced this speech many times. She will bear children, he said carefully, not quite meeting my eyes. But you are still my wife. I nodded. What else could I do? People still called him my husband. They still called me his wife. But each time I heard those words, they felt heavier, like titles without meaning, ownership without possession, territory without control. At night, I lay awake and listened to life being made elsewhere in my own compound. And I learned something our mothers never taught us. Sometimes, love doesn't leave. It simply moves aside to make room for something younger, fresher, more fertile. The night Nancy went into labor, I prayed for two things: that the baby would survive and that I would survive watching him being born. Only one of those prayers was answered. Nancy went into labor at the height of the rainy season, all when the roads turned to rivers and the sky opened, like it wanted to drown the whole world. We couldn't rush her to the hospital. The flooding was too severe. So we called the women from the compound, from the street, from the neighboring houses. They gathered like they always did for births, their wrappers soaked by rain, their voices rising and falling with practiced urgency. Someone get the midwife from down the street, the eldest woman ordered. Boil water, bring clean cloth, another shouted. I sat on a low stool near the doorway, my hands folded in my lap, my back straight, my face arranged into something resembling calm. Inside me, everything trembled. Nancy screamed. Each sound cut through the night, through the rain, through my carefully constructed composure. Each cry reminded me that her body was doing what mine had refused to do for 8 long years. When the baby finally arrived, its cry was strong and immediate, healthy, alive, perfect. A boy, someone shouted. The word exploded into the night like fireworks. Women ululated. Men outside laughed and clapped. Francis's name was called again and again, stretched into praise, celebrated like he had accomplished something miraculous. I did not move. I felt something loosen inside me, relief and grief arriving together, like twins who refused to be separated. The baby I had prayed for had finally come, just not from my body. By morning, the compound smelled of blood, herbs, and celebration. Francis came to me, his face lit with something I hadn't seen in years: joy, relief, gratitude, all tangled together. He touched my shoulder gently and almost apologetically. His name is Chukwemeka, he said. It means God has done so much. He cried immediately. He's strong. I nodded. That is good. He hesitated, then added, You will be his mother too. I looked at him, and I wondered if men knew how easily they handed women impossible sentences and called them kindness. On the 8th day, when they named Nancy's son, I held him in my arms, and he called me Mama. And for one brief, beautiful moment, I forgot he wasn't mine. Everyone came to name the child on the 8th day. They filled the compound, inside, outside, spilling into the street. Nancy sat inside, the baby tied to her chest with a bright new wrapper, her face glowing with the kind of satisfaction only new mothers know. I stood behind her. That was where I belonged now. Behind, supporting, present, but invisible. The baby was named Chukwuemeka. God has done so much. People nodded in approval. A good name. A name that carried gratitude and testimony. Food was shared. Drinks flowed. Laughter returned to the compound like a relative who had been away too long. Someone pressed the baby into my arms. He should get used to you, an elderly woman said, smiling. After all, you are the senior wife. You will help raise him. The baby was warm and heavy. He smelled of milk and new beginnings and possibilities. He looked at me with unfocused eyes, and for one brief stolen moment, I let myself pretend. Then Nancy called softly, Give him back to me. He needs to feed. I handed him over, and just like that, the moment ended. They say time heals all wounds, but what they don't tell you is that sometimes you just get better at bleeding quietly. After Chukwuemeka's birth, Francis built the bigger house he had once spoken of, the one we had planned together in those early years. Rooms multiplied, the compound grew, life returned to our home like water filling a dried well. Visitors came again, bringing gifts, bringing laughter, bringing the kind of energy that had been missing for years. They smiled at me with renewed warmth, as if the problem had been solved and therefore forgiven. People praised me constantly. You are so strong, they said. You are so dignified, they whispered. You are a good woman. God will reward you, they promised. Endurance became my name, my title, my identity. At night, Francis divided his time carefully. Some nights he came to my room. Some nights he did not. When he did come, we spoke politely. We spoke of the weather, and we spoke of Chukwuemeka's growth, how he was sitting up now, how his smile looked just like Francis's. We did not speak of us. There was no us left to discuss. Little Chukwuemeka learned to walk holding my wrapper. He learned to speak sitting near my feet as I sorted grains or peeled vegetables. His first clear word was not Dada for father. It was Mama. He was looking at me when he said it. Nancy laughed when she heard it. He spent too much time with you, she said, not unkindly. I smiled and said nothing. But at night alone on my bed, I whispered to myself, children are not careful with the hearts they choose. Francis died on a Tuesday, and the strangest thing, even in death, he managed to leave me with nothing. Years passed in this strange arrangement. Nancy bore another child, a daughter this time, then another son. The compound echoed constantly with running feet. with quarrels and laughter, and the kind of noise that comes only from a house full of children. I aged quietly. My body softened, then stiffened. My hair grayed at the edges, then spread like frost across my head. Sometimes women came to me secretly when their own marriages began to crack. Sister Grace, you are so strong, they would say. You are blessed. You are respected. Teach us how to endure. I would nod and offer what wisdom I could. But inside, I wanted to scream. Respect is a cold thing to sleep beside at night. One evening, Francis sat beside me on the veranda. It was one of those rare moments when we were alone, when Nancy had taken the children to visit her mother. You have been good to this family, he said quietly. I waited. There was more coming. Or when I am gone, he continued slowly, they will remember you. They will speak your name with honor. I looked at him and realized something that made my blood run cold. He was already preparing for a world without himself. He was already planning his exit, but he hadn't thought about what would happen to me. You know what's worse than watching your husband die? Watching him die while his mistress cries louder than you, like she has more right to grieve. Francis fell ill during the dry season. At first, it was small things: coughing, a heaviness in his chest, a tiredness that sleep couldn't cure. Then it became something else, something that didn't respond to herbs or prayers or hospital treatments or waiting. I cared for him. I bathed him when he became too weak. I fed him when his hands shook too much to hold a spoon. I sat beside him through long nights when pain wouldn't let him sleep. Nancy cried. She cried loudly, dramatically, like women do in Nollywood films. Francis, don't die and leave me. Oh, she would wail. You know I have children. I have 3 children. What will I do? How will I survive? Every time she said it, something heavy settled deeper in my chest. Francis held my hand one evening when the room was quiet and Nancy had finally exhausted herself into sleep. I know this has not been the life you imagined, he whispered. I said nothing. I am grateful, he added, his voice barely audible, for you, for everything. I nodded, but gratitude, I had learned, is not the same as love, and it's definitely not the same as justice. Days passed, then weeks, then months. Francis was not getting stronger. He was not responding to treatment. Even the doctors had stopped pretending there was hope. I had already lost hope long before that. And then, on a Tuesday morning, when the sun was just beginning to climb, and the world was still deciding whether to wake up or sleep a little longer, Francis died. I felt the moment it happened. I felt it like a door closing somewhere deep inside me. I felt like the whole world had collapsed on my head. But here's the truth nobody tells you. Sometimes, when the worst thing finally happens, you feel relief. Just for a second. Just long enough to catch your breath before the real grief arrives. Francis was buried with honors. The compound filled with people again, this time dressed in black, singing funeral songs, praising his name. They called him a good man, a provider, a father. Nancy cried at the graveside, her children clinging to her wrapper. I stood apart, dry-eyed, watching them lower my husband into the earth. And you know what I realized in that moment? I had spent 8 years being the perfect wife, the understanding wife, the wife who smiled and made room and swallowed every humiliation with grace. And what did it get me? A funeral where I stood in the background while another woman played the grieving widow. Moral lesson. Let me tell you something I wish someone had told me when I was young. Endurance is not always virtue. Sometimes it's just fear wearing a respectable mask. Patience is not always wisdom. Sometimes it's just silence that forgot how to scream. And being the bigger person sometimes just means making yourself smaller and smaller until you disappear completely. I spent years telling myself I was being strong. I could but strength without boundaries is just suffering with good PR. So here's what I need from you. If this story touched you, if you felt even a fraction of what I felt, I need you to do three things right now. First, smash that subscribe button because this is only part one. And what happens next will shock you. Second, drop a comment. Tell me, have you ever stayed in a situation longer than you should have because people told you it was the right thing to do? Or tell me where you're watching from. I want to know this story is reaching women everywhere who need to hear it. Third, share this video. There's a woman in your life who needs to hear this. Your sister, your friend, your cousin, the quiet woman at church who always smiles. Send this to her right now. This is Grace, and my story isn't over yet. In part two, you'll find out what happened after Francis died. And trust me, you are not ready for what Nancy did next. Until then, remember, your value is not measured by what you can endure, it's measured by what you refuse to accept. See you in the next part.